There is a stretch of water in Southeast Asia that does not look like much on a map. It is narrow, crowded with shipping traffic, and flanked on both sides by dense tropical coastline. On a clear day, you could stand on the deck of a passing cargo ship and see land on either side of you at the same time. And yet this strip of ocean, this thin blue corridor between the Malay Peninsula and the Indonesian island of Sumatra, is arguably the most consequential geographic feature in the global economy today. It is called the Strait of Malacca, and through it flows nearly a quarter of all the world's traded goods. More than 80,000 vessels pass through it every year. And for China, the world's largest importer of crude oil, it represents something that keeps energy strategists awake at night. It is not just a shipping lane, it is a vulnerability, a single point of failure in the circulatory system of the entire Chinese economy. Chinese military planners even have a name for it. They call it the Malacca Dilemma. The idea is straightforward and deeply uncomfortable. If a hostile naval power, or even a coalition of regional forces, were to effectively block or disrupt traffic through that strait, China's oil supply could be throttled in a matter of weeks, not through war, not through economic sanctions, simply through geography. And the solution to that dilemma, it turns out, cannot be found by building a bigger navy or carving out an alternative shipping route. The only real solution, the only one that removes the vulnerability entirely, is to stop needing oil in the first place. And that, against all expectations, appears to be exactly what China is attempting to do. Not in a distant, theoretical sense. Not in the way governments sometimes announce ambitious climate goals and then quietly walk them back when the economics become inconvenient. But in a systematic, engineering-driven, deeply strategic sense that connects 6 separate technological fields into a single coherent plan. A plan that, if it reaches maturity, would allow China to produce all of its energy, all of its aviation fuel, all of its industrial chemicals, and eventually all of its electrical power, from air, water, and sunlight alone. No imported oil, no foreign-controlled resources, no strategic choke points that any rival nation could exploit. This video is about those 6 technologies. But more than that, it is about understanding why they belong together, because when you look at them individually, they seem impressive, but perhaps disconnected. A new kind of battery here, a cleaner way to make fertilizer there, a fusion reactor being tested in a laboratory somewhere in central China. But when you step back and look at the whole picture, when you see how each piece fits into the others, what emerges is something that feels less like a collection of inventions and more like the blueprint for an entirely new kind of civilization. One that runs not on what the Earth was lucky enough to store underground over millions of years, but on what physics and chemistry allow us to build from scratch, anywhere, at any time. Let us start at the beginning. And the beginning, in this story, is a problem that most people have never thought seriously about. We talk about the energy transition constantly: solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles, and all of those things are real and important. But there is a part of the energy system that solar panels and electric car batteries simply cannot address directly, at least not yet, and that is liquid fuel. Specifically, the kind of dense, energy-rich liquid fuel that powers jet aircraft, large cargo ships, and heavy industrial machinery. These sectors are sometimes called hard to abate because you cannot simply plug them into a wall socket. A Boeing 777 crossing the Pacific cannot run on a battery. A container ship the size of a small town cannot be powered by a lithium-ion pack. They need liquid fuel with enormous energy density. And for a century, the only practical source of that kind of fuel has been crude oil, refined into kerosene and diesel and bunker fuel. So what do you do if you want to stop importing oil, but you still need jet fuel? You build it, molecule by molecule, from carbon and hydrogen. This is the first of the 6 breakthroughs, and it is the one that perhaps best captures the almost science-fictional ambition of what is being attempted. Researchers at the Dalian Institute of Chemical Physics in China have demonstrated a process for synthesizing jet fuel using carbon dioxide captured from the atmosphere combined with hydrogen to produce hydrocarbon molecules that are chemically nearly identical to conventional aviation fuel. Not similar, not a close substitute, chemically equivalent. A plane would not know the difference. The engines would not know the difference. Only the supply chain would be unrecognizable. The underlying chemistry is based on a process called the Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, which has actually been known since the 1920s. German engineers developed it during the Second World War to produce liquid fuel from coal when petroleum supplies were constrained. So the basic idea is not new. What is new is the efficiency of the catalysts being used and the source of the carbon and hydrogen inputs. In the Chinese approach, the carbon comes from atmospheric CO2, captured air essentially, and the hydrogen comes from water, split through electrolysis using renewable electricity. The result is a fuel that can be produced almost anywhere there is air and water and electricity, with no carbon that was not already in the atmosphere to begin with. A pilot demonstration at the Dalian facility reportedly produced over 1,000 tons of synthetic fuel in a single continuous run. That is still small compared to what a major refinery produces in a day. But it is real. It is working. And the cost trajectory of synthetic fuel production, like the cost trajectory of almost every clean energy technology, tends to fall sharply as manufacturing scale increases and catalyst designs improve. Dr. Sophia Martens, a synthetic fuels researcher at the Technical University of Munich, has described the significance of these developments carefully. In her assessment, the barrier to synthetic aviation fuel has never been scientific plausibility. It has always been the energy cost of producing the hydrogen that the process requires. And that energy cost, she notes, is falling in ways that would have seemed implausible even 5 years ago. Which leads us, naturally, to hydrogen. Because hydrogen is not just one piece of this puzzle. It is the connective tissue that holds all 6 pieces together. It is the molecule that links renewable electricity to liquid fuel to industrial chemicals to shipping to grid-scale energy storage. And understanding what China is doing with hydrogen, the scale of it, the speed of it, the strategic intentionality of it, is essential to understanding what is really happening here. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. It is everywhere. It is in every molecule of water on the planet. The problem is that it does not exist in pure form in nature. It has to be extracted from something, and that extraction process requires energy. Today, the vast majority of the world's hydrogen is produced from natural gas through a chemical process that releases large amounts of carbon dioxide as a byproduct. This is called gray hydrogen. It is cheap, it is widely used, and it is about as environmentally friendly as burning coal. It is not what China is building toward. Green hydrogen is different. It is produced by running electricity through water, a process called electrolysis, which splits water molecules into their component hydrogen and oxygen atoms. The hydrogen can then be captured, compressed, stored, and used as a fuel or a chemical feedstock. If the electricity used for electrolysis comes from renewable sources like solar or wind, the entire process produces no carbon emissions at all. The only inputs are water and sunlight. The only output, aside from the hydrogen itself, is oxygen, which simply returns to the atmosphere. China is now operating the largest green hydrogen production facilities in the world. Plants in Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, and Gansu province, regions with some of the most abundant solar and wind resources on the planet, are producing green hydrogen through electrolysis at a scale that would have seemed ambitious even 3 years ago. The installed electrolyzer capacity in China has grown by a factor of more than 10 since 2020. And here's the number that really tells the story. China now manufactures approximately 60% of all the electrolyzer equipment produced globally. The machines that make green hydrogen are, overwhelmingly, made in China. And that manufacturing dominance is not accidental. It is the result of deliberate industrial policy, sustained investment, and the kind of long-term planning that is very difficult to replicate quickly. Professor James Okafor, a materials electrochemist at Imperial College London, has noted when reviewing recent research in this field that the trajectory of efficiency improvements in Chinese electrolyzer technology is following a curve that looks, in certain respects, like the early years of solar photovoltaic development. Iterative, accelerating, and increasingly difficult for other nations to match simply because of the sheer volume of researchers, manufacturing experience, and accumulated engineering data being built up on the Chinese side. The lesson from solar is instructive. 20 years ago, solar panels were expensive, niche, and largely manufactured in Europe and the United States. Today they are cheap, ubiquitous, and manufactured overwhelmingly in China. The country that led the manufacturing scale-up captured the market. The same dynamic may now be unfolding with hydrogen. But producing hydrogen is only part of the challenge. The electrolysis process itself, the specific technology used to split water, matters enormously, both for efficiency and for cost. And this brings us to the third breakthrough, advanced electrolysis. Traditional electrolyzers of the type most commonly used today rely on what is called proton exchange membrane technology, or PEM. PEM electrolyzers work well, but they require catalysts made from platinum and iridium, metals that are expensive, geopolitically concentrated in their supply, and not particularly abundant. This creates exactly the kind of supply chain vulnerability that China is trying to design its way out of. If you are trying to achieve genuine energy independence, it does not make sense to swap a dependence on imported oil for a dependence on imported platinum. Chinese research teams have been working aggressively on alternative electrolysis architectures. Alkaline electrolyzers, which use cheaper materials and have been around longer, are being refined and improved with new electrode designs that close much of the efficiency gap with PEM systems. Solid oxide electrolyzers, which operate at high temperatures and can achieve very high efficiencies, are advancing toward commercial scale. And then there are entirely new approaches, novel electrode materials, new catalyst chemistries, new membrane designs, emerging from laboratories across China at a pace that is genuinely remarkable. Researchers at Wuhan University of Technology published results in 2023 describing a new electrode material that achieved hydrogen production efficiency improvements of approximately 30% compared to standard industrial systems, using materials that cost a fraction of platinum-based alternatives. 30% is not a marginal improvement. In a process where energy cost is the dominant economic variable, a 30% efficiency gain can be the difference between a technology that is economically marginal and one that is clearly competitive, and results like this are not isolated. Now, even with cheap green hydrogen and efficient electrolysis, there remains a fundamental challenge that no amount of chemistry can fully solve on its own: the intermittency problem. The sun does not always shine, the wind does not always blow, and the electricity grid cannot tolerate supply that fluctuates unpredictably with the weather. Energy storage, the ability to capture surplus electricity when it is available and release it when it is needed, is therefore not a nice-to-have feature of a clean energy system. It is a core requirement. And most people, when they think about energy storage, think about batteries. Lithium-ion batteries, the kind in your phone and your electric car. And batteries are important, but they also have real limitations. They degrade over time. They require materials like lithium, cobalt, and nickel that are mined in specific and sometimes geopolitically sensitive locations, and they become increasingly expensive and impractical at very large scales. China's fourth breakthrough involves a completely different approach to grid-scale energy storage. It is called liquid air energy storage, and it works through a process that sounds almost implausible until you understand the physics. When electricity is plentiful, say on a sunny afternoon in Inner Mongolia, when the solar arrays are generating more power than the grid can immediately absorb, that surplus electricity is used to power industrial refrigeration equipment that cools ordinary air down to approximately negative 190 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, air transitions from a gas to a liquid. It takes up roughly 700 times less volume than it did as a gas. You can store it in large, well-insulated tanks, similar in principle to the tanks used to store liquid natural gas, except that the contents are simply air. Then, when electricity is needed, overnight or on a still, cloudy day, the liquid air is allowed to warm up. As it warms, it expands dramatically, and that expansion can be used to drive turbines that generate electricity, much like a conventional gas turbine. The beauty of this system from a strategic standpoint is its simplicity of inputs. The storage medium is air. It is free. It is available everywhere on Earth. It requires no rare earth metals, no lithium, no cobalt, no complex chemical supply chain. The tanks that hold it can be built from conventional industrial materials. The turbines that extract energy from it are based on well-understood engineering. And unlike batteries, the tanks do not degrade meaningfully over time. They can store energy for days or weeks without significant losses, which batteries cannot easily do. The world's largest liquid air energy storage facility opened in China in 2023 with a capacity of 60 megawatt hours. That is a meaningful scale for a first-of-its-kind commercial project, and significantly larger projects are already in development. When you pair this kind of storage capacity with the massive wind and solar build-out happening across Western China, the outline of something genuinely new begins to take shape, a grid that can generate, store, and dispatch clean electricity reliably across vast distances without any fuel input whatsoever. But electricity alone, even abundant and cheap electricity, does not replace everything that oil currently provides. A civilization also needs to feed itself. And feeding a civilization, particularly one as large as China's, with 1.4 billion people, requires fertilizer. And fertilizer requires ammonia. The Haber-Bosch process, developed in Germany in the early 20th century, is the industrial method for synthesizing ammonia from nitrogen gas and hydrogen. It is one of the most consequential inventions in human history. Without synthetic fertilizer made from ammonia, it is estimated that roughly half the human population currently alive could not be fed by the Earth's agricultural land. Ammonia is the foundation of modern food production. It is also, unfortunately, one of the most carbon-intensive industrial processes on the planet. Conventional ammonia production consumes approximately 1 to 2% of all global energy and releases comparable quantities of carbon dioxide because the hydrogen used in the Haber-Bosch process comes almost entirely from natural gas. Green ammonia replaces that naturally derived hydrogen with green hydrogen, produced from water and renewable electricity. The nitrogen still comes from the air, which is already 78% nitrogen by volume. The result is ammonia that can be synthesized with near-zero carbon emissions from inputs that are available virtually everywhere. China has announced multiple green ammonia projects over the past several years, some targeting production capacities of hundreds of thousands of tons annually. But green ammonia's significance extends well beyond fertilizer. Ammonia has a much higher energy density than hydrogen when stored in liquid form, and it can be liquefied at relatively modest pressures, far more practical than compressed hydrogen for large-scale transport and storage. This makes it an attractive candidate as a shipping fuel. Large cargo vessels and tankers can be modified to run on ammonia in adapted combustion engines or fuel cells, potentially eliminating the carbon footprint of one of the most polluting sectors in the global economy. Dr. Aisha Yilmaz, a chemical engineer specializing in industrial decarbonization at ETH Zurich, has described green ammonia as one of the most underappreciated molecules in the entire clean energy transition. It connects renewable electricity to agriculture, to shipping, to heavy industry, through a single supply chain. And whoever masters its production at scale, she argues, holds considerable influence over how the global food and industrial system evolves through the middle of this century. It is not a glamorous technology. It does not have the visual drama of a solar panel gleaming on a rooftop or a fusion reactor holding plasma at temperatures that dwarf the surface of the sun. But it may, in the long run, be one of the most strategically significant. And speaking of fusion reactors, that brings us to the sixth and final piece of the puzzle. And it is, by any measure, the most ambitious. Everything described so far, synthetic fuel, green hydrogen, advanced electrolysis, liquid air storage, green ammonia. These are technologies that exist today in working, commercial, or near commercial form. They are scaling now. They are getting cheaper now. They are changing the economics of energy now. They represent the near-term architecture of China's strategy. But running beneath all of them, like a current moving far below the surface, is a longer and more fundamental ambition. An ambition that does not operate on a 5-year or 10-year timescale. One that operates on the timescale of civilizations. And that ambition is nuclear fusion. Fusion is the process that powers the sun. It works by combining light atomic nuclei, typically isotopes of hydrogen, under conditions of extreme temperature and pressure, releasing enormous amounts of energy in the process. The fuel is hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe. The primary byproduct is helium. There is no carbon emissions. There is no long-lived radioactive waste. And the energy released per unit of fuel is orders of magnitude greater than any chemical combustion process. A fusion power plant running on hydrogen extracted from seawater would have access to a fuel supply that is, for all practical purposes, limitless. The challenge, and it is a formidable one, is creating and sustaining the conditions required for fusion to occur. Plasma temperatures of tens of millions of degrees must be achieved and maintained. The plasma must be confined in a magnetic field strong enough to prevent it from touching and destroying the walls of the reactor. And the energy extracted must exceed the energy input by a meaningful margin. This last condition, more energy out than in, has not yet been consistently demonstrated at scale, though the gap has closed considerably in recent years.